We are on day 51. What you see here is another self-design. Again, I'm cutting into the wing and customizing a little bit. What you got to do is you got to get yourself a belt crank. This is something I've never done again. I usually just have straight hookups to everything, or usually your ailerons, all my other models, your ailerons tie in here in the middle, which is simple enough. You just put a servo in the middle and then run 2 wires to it, and that's it. Pretty simple. But this particular model here, since I got double ailerons, you're using the bottom wing as a master wing and the upper wing as a slave. So basically what I mean is, instead of running off here, you're going to run your linkages outboard with the servo still in the middle, but now you're running the linkages outboard, which means you're going to have to run out to this aileron. Bell crank should be right here somewhere, but I don't see it. There it is. You're still getting a good view of this here. Maybe not. Pull out a little bit here. Okay, you got a bell crank. You put right in here, and this transfers. You get the idea. This transfers a 90-degree to your aileron. To run your aileron. My aileron's still not cut out. I'm going to go ahead and rig everything with it in. That way I got complete neutral rig. Everything will be rigged right to the wing as a plain neutral rig. Then when I come cut them out, put them up, I should have already an exact neutral rig. That's the theory anyway. We'll see if it works. Well, anyway, what they first ask you to do is, you're running this wire through your ribs to your center. Well, to get a drill in there, you better either have a 90-degree drill. I tried it by hand, and I did do it by hand. And then I ran my wire through there, and after I got done going through each and every rib, it was no longer a straight shot. Now the wire was tweaking in between ribs, so I was dragging. It wasn't a free flow. You don't want to put any load on your rigs. You'd want all your rigs to be free flowing, very minimal, if nothing, drag wise on your rigs. All you do is eat your battery when you do that. So I went ahead and glued all these little plywood doublers on there when I did that, so I had to tear them back out. And then I went ahead and just got me some plastic conduit, some of my scrap laying around here. I just cut right into the rib, laid my conduit in there. Now all I'm going to do is take this cap strip I got in my hand, and I'm just going to go ahead and cap strip right back over the top of it. Now I have a in-wing conduit, free flowing, and that rod is going to be no problem with any kind of drag. What you're doing this for, again, is no drag, but also over time, if the model lasts long enough, like I had a T-34 here for a while, that model was about 15 years old, and the rigs have never, I opened that wing up because it had some wing damage to it, and the rods eventually saw into the ribs. And over time, you start getting a sloppy rig. When you get a sloppy rig, that means your ailerons aren't going to react the way they should. Once you lose you start getting slack in there. When you ask to turn right, it's going to have some slack to pick up before it actually turns right. You prevent this right now. You have this option to do this now as you're building the model. And this model should last for years, as long as it doesn't hit a fence. So anyway, this is rigs are some of your most critical. Anybody can build a model over time, but when you start getting into your rigs, this is when you start truing up everything. Because when this thing's doing 50 miles an hour, 40, 50 miles an hour, however fast these things go, you want to have full control. I brought this up. Now we're running our rigs out to our bell crank, which is going to drive our outboard aileron. Now, after we have the master wing, the bottom wing, which is a master, running its outboard ailerons, and we're going to run the slave wing, the upper wing, off of that aileron. So we're going to run a rig from this slot. There's going to be a horn in here, and it's going to go up to the upper aileron, which has a horn on it. You're just going to hook the two together. Now this wing is running the upper wing, and you have a double aileron situation. So onward. Oh, since I don't think I have showed it yet, before I cover it up, I get kind of serious about my wing bolt locations. Like I put brass inserts or brass threads normally in the base of, and you've seen earlier, I kind of beef up that aft wing area. Also what I do, I came up with this a couple years back, troubleshooting a problem with my Bonanza on the foam core wing. When you tighten down the wing bolts, you would end up crushing the wing if you really tighten them down too far, and then over time you just end up with a damaged wing. So normally what I do with all my models is I take one of these pins right here, or I have a whole bunch of these pins. It's a round stick, it's a big round stick pin. The casings on these things are perfect for nylon wing bolts. Perfect. I mean, all you have to do is you take the casing all apart, or when the pins are dead or whatever. Pins are cheap too, and see how that wing bolt just goes right in there? And you can cut that at any length. What I do is I drill my holes. It takes me a while to do my wing bolt locations for this reason, because I really beef them up. I drill these holes in these wings, and I encase this in there. And then on the opposite side, or always on the bottom side, under the head, I always do some kind of either a plywood washer or a plastic washer or something inside that hole right there. So underneath that wing, underneath that bolt, I don't know if you can see it in the color of the camera, there is a plastic washer underneath that head. So now I can crank down my wing bolts, and I'll bust my wing bolt off before I'll crush my wing. Same thing if I'm like trying to tear the wings off this thing when I'm flying it. The screw will let loose before my wing will let loose. And these are your critical points right here. And I even got it inset. I sunk it into the wing, and then I beefed it up. So this caps off the top of the pin casing. I mean, I will break my screw off before I will ever crush my wing in that location. So when my wings are down tight, they're down tight. I know they're down tight. I've seen wings come loose in the air, and it's not a pretty sight. You lose all control of your airplane. And this is one of the areas that take up a lot of the load too, so you want to make sure that this can handle an awesome load. You're blowing aileron before you tear my wing off. I did go for a double dowel setup in front too, so I have double dowels. They kind of look like they're not sticking out as far as maybe they should, but I think they'll be all right. They're going right into a plywood bulkhead. Plus, they go into the landing gear area, and I didn't want to get too far into the landing gear area. We'll see if we run into a problem on that, but That wing center section is one of the most critical. When you start cutting in for ailerons and that, see, I start cutting into the joins and the ribs, you want to make sure that you reinforce that back in there. Don't weaken it and then leave it. Because once you cover it up, you most likely will never see it again. Unless you tear it back apart. I don't plan on doing. Okay, here we are. I got it all cap stripped off, and there it is. Now the conduit is hiding in the wing. Now next would be the platform for the bell crank outboard. And keep in mind, this is all going to be hidden once you cover it. So you want this to be like it. Okay, so now I can put my wire, feed my wire into my wing for my servo. Now let me show you this before I actually do. You're going to end up doing a lot of Z-bends. You don't want to put any linkages that can come apart over a long period of time. Plus you're limited on space and you're limited on weight. You really ought to build it as light as you can. So in order to do these Z-bends, I used to do these Z-bends by hand. And it sure was a bummer, because they come out sloppy and you keep bending them and keep bending them and bending them. So you get yourself a pair of these Z-bend pliers. And these Z-bend pliers, you can put straight wire in there. Put it straight across, exactly where you want it. You can find center if you want. And then you just squeeze it. Doesn't take all that much to bend the wire, and you end up with a Z-bend, nice and clean, and your bell crank can slip fairly easy on it. So now all we have to do is feed that in there. Okay, now there's your bell crank. Now you know where you need to be slope-wise, inboard and outboard, and then you want, I have my bottom horn is already hooked in. I don't have it glued in, it's just temporary right now. So now you can see where everything's going to set. No, yeah, you can't see all this anyway. Okay, there's the bottom of the wing. It's the bottom of the wing. So now we have to transfer this angle of the horn, because keep in mind my aileron's still in my wing, so this is where it's going to sit at neutral. So run this linkage up to your, this is a plywood platform we're going to glue in between the ribs here. You got the right angle that you need, and then you kind of transfer the difference right here. Alright, there's dead neutral. All we have to do is pop this hole right through dead center. There's your axis, and you're rigged. Basically, you're rigged. So now I can do the same to the other side. Then both wings will be done. And I can almost consider covering the wing. You have that option now, because now there's no reason not to cover it. And I'm going to do fabric hinges, which means I'm going to use the fabric that I'm going to cover the wing with. I'm going to use it for the hinge. That will cover up the area of the hinge point, reduce drag, and it'll give you a quicker snap. Plus it'll look prettier. And works out pretty good that way. I'll show you what I mean. Anyway, that rudder on, well, the rudder and the horizontal stabilizer, I used the monocode for the hinges. So when I covered that, I actually utilized the fabric at the same time to create the hinge. It's a nice strong hinge, creates a lot of little drag. You don't have to worry about like I did on my Trainer 60, the hinges come loose and you end up blowing an aileron or losing a flight control while you're in the air, and you never know. I was told I lucked out when I blew my aileron on my my Trainer, due to the fact that it was in neutral when it blew, or we think it was. It could have threw me into a spin like now. And if I have double ailerons, imagine how quick a spin would become if you ended up losing such a thing. So this is all these things you have to keep in mind, and all these things you get in experience. The 52, I think. Sunday. Bottom wing is rigged, or permanent rig is in the wing. I still have to close it. I'm taking this now before I close it. This is permanent. This is going to stay in the wing and going to get all hidden by the fabric. I've never done quite this kind of a rig before. Had to do a little give and take here and there on a couple of things. But it looks fine now. You can take a look at the center. I had to offset. I had to offset the center. That's straight neutral, and that's rigged right to the ailerons as they sit still in the wings. I still haven't cut them out. So I had to kind of slide things over to the one side to accommodate the fact that the servo is going to be laying on its side, and I'm just going to use a standard servo. And you can see the motor drive gear is to the side. I mean, it's offset. So you can see now I'm in a line with the ball, and that's a ball setup that is just going to gear right on there. And it's good to go. But I still need to mount the servo. I got to do the servo mount. But I thought I'd do this before the servo mount's going to kind of hide things. I'm going to close the wing up too. But you can see why it's so important that I put the red conduits inside these wings. I scored a lot of wing damage here for while doing all of this. But as you see this thing move, it's a constant sawing action. Over time, it'll start binding, and you'll start getting sloppy, and it would just cut right into the ribs, and it just really gets to be a hassle. Well, not a hassle, it just becomes sloppy after a while. You start losing the effect of the plane. You don't want to lose the effect of the plane unless you drill it in the ground. So, this is it. Bottom wing is rigged. I'll go ahead and close it up. Close up, I mean, I'm going to put the servo mount in the center. Get the servo mount where I like it to be, and then I'm going to close up the areas that are supposed to be closed. And then I believe I'm going to cut out an aileron. And we'll have one of these ailerons fall right out. Alright, here we are with the center servo is installed. It's a makeshift servo tray that I come up with. You get good with those as time goes on. At first, when you start in this hobby, you think you have to put them on specific store-bought things, and you think that servos are elite little items until you start understanding they're nothing but a little motor, and you can install them in many different ways. You can get pretty creative with this. This here is rigged. This lower wing is all rigged. I'm going to rig this up with a 4-channel. A 4-channel radio means it's got capability of 4 motors. You got 4 servos that run 4 different items. So this one particular servo is going to run all the ailerons. Then I'm going to put one in for the throttle, one in for the rudder, and one in for the elevator. Nose wheel will run off, or tail wheel will run off, or rudder. Well, it's hooked up to rudder anyway, but that's all the channels mean. One channel per servo. I had my 6-channel radio in this. I'd have capability of 6 servos operating landing gear, flaps. So your channels, 1 channel per servo. This one here is rigged. Finally, took me a little while. I ended up with some damage out here. Let me get a close-up shot. Created a little bit of damage to the skin out there. I had to crank that out about 3 turns. All of a sudden that thing wasn't 90 degrees anymore, and I had these things permanent. I was set to go and I was permanent, and then when I went ahead with my servo and got this final rig going, all of a sudden all hell broke loose and I wasn't 90 degrees anymore, so I had to break some shit apart, and luckily enough it worked out. Now what you have in front of you is a 4-channel radio. It's just a radio that you hold in your hand, and then next to it is the receiver, which goes in the airplane. This receives all the signals from the radio in the coiled up antenna. You get the antenna out there, hook it up to the tail, and it picks up the radio, the transmitter. And then you got about a 2-mile radius, if not farther than that, probably as far as you can see. Need glasses, might be closer. So right now what you do is you just put 2 more items in there to run this. You have an onboard battery, which is going to run the receiver in the airplane, and the battery will also be the battery source for everything on board. Actually, it'll run the receiver, run all of your servos, and then any other thing that you have hooked up, like maybe lighting and that. It depends on your battery. You might want to put more than 1 battery in or not. So we're just going to throw a battery in there and a switch. The switch will shut the battery off from the receiver, so you can shut it on and off when you hook it up in the airplane. So you got your battery hooked up with a switch, and then we'll hook that all together and we'll show you how this all works right here. One thing when you do buy radios, when you buy a 4-channel radio, you usually only get 3 servos. Why they do that, I have no idea. Usually because when you're training, you only need 3 flight controls: elevator, rudder, and throttle. They usually throw ailerons in there as like a luxury, I guess. So when you buy a 4-channel, you don't get the 4 servos, but you do get a 6-channel receiver, so it does give you a chance of going up and down with this particular channel. This particular channel is 23. Okay, so I have that servo in the wing is hooked into the aileron hookup in the receiver, and the switch is on, so everything's active. So right now what you got, if I move to the right, I just went to the left. Okay, so we'll just reverse that. See, so the radios have reverse switches, so you can just reverse it. So you got, there's right, there's left, right, left, right. Close-up view of it. See, and I have my ailerons. This is all permanent in there. I have my retainers in, so I ain't talking worth shit. Right, left. So you want it to be nice and free-flowing. There's a ball-in socket set up that's hooked up to the aileron, so I am driving the same rod for left and right. It gives you the most accurate differential control, I guess you would call it. Most accurate. My right is traveling just as far as my left. Exactly. As close as you can possibly get. And that's rigging. So now that we have this, now we'll move on to the other rigs, like cutting out ailerons.